Hello friends, this is Otz, according to a verified user on Twitter, and today we will have a 2-for-1 special video. The first thing we'll be doing is I'm gonna go through every killer in the game and show you my favorite cosmetics on each of them. I don't know why, but some of you are very interested in my tastes. And more importantly, we will also be giving each killer a lore accurate build that fits them. To make things a little bit more interesting and fresh, I will not allow the killers to use their own perks, and there will be no repeats. Sometimes some perks are really applicable to a lot of killers, only use once. Unfortunately, with these rules, as you can see, some killers don't have enough perks, and I thought this was a little lame, so I amended the rules a little bit to allow one perk repeat every now and then, just so that everyone got at least 4 perks. So these are the builds that we will be running. Now we're gonna go through each of the killers and I will explain why. And we're gonna start with the Trapper. Now the Trapper, if you read his biography, is the son of a wealthy businessman, and he literally and figuratively works his workers to death. That's why oppression seems very, very appropriate. He literally doesn't give them a way out, because at one point he grows so absolutely insane that he traps all of his workers and kills them en masse in the mines by trapping them and making them starve to death. And in a way, Blood Warden also is appropriate, because not only is he blocking them the way Blood Warden blocks the Exegates, he's also protecting his blood, protecting the empire of his father. And that's also the reason why we have Dark Devotion. It's obvious from the description that he has a very unhealthy obsession with following his father's instructions, even when his father is very obviously going insane. So I think this build makes perfect sense. Is this a really good build for Trapper? Honestly, endgame perks work pretty well, but everything else is not too good. So if you do try this build, you won't have, I think, a ton of success, but you know, you might get lucky. This outfit, I don't know why, it just looks so cool. I really, really like it. There are a lot of cool ones on Trapper, however, it's really hard to pick. Obviously Naughty Bear is really fun, and one that I liked for a long time was this one. I really like this miner outfit, and there's this thing used to be exclusive, only a few people had it, now it's universal, and for some reason this scuba diving, yeah, Ocean's Racer, yeah, this used to be my look on Trapper for a long time. If you see some of my old art, I also really like this one. Anyway, moving on to the next one. The Wraith. This one's gonna be a little bit harder to understand, but why do we have Zanchin tactics? The Wraith is actually pretty much a child soldier, or a child that grew up in a war-torn country, and he does have to at one point pursue a militia that's escaping to avenge his village. That's why I think giving him a perk that has some kind of, like, you know, war or battlefield connotation seems very appropriate. He also, you might have realized if you pay close attention to his motto, he's also burned. And the reason why is because when he set this militia ablaze and he killed them, he burned himself. I think Fire Up also then makes sense. Gearhead is a little bit cheeky, but we do have a character that worked for a long time in a, you know, records yard, right? So it seems appropriate. And Haunted Ground, I also think is alright. If you think about it, what happened when the Wraith moved to the United States and started working in this yard is that he inadvertently killed a lot of people. He was crushing cars and only later realized that in each of these cars there were corpses, you know, because his boss worked for the mafia, basically. And this created pretty much an unholy ground. If you look, this is very easy to miss, but if you look at the Autohaven map and you look at the actual tiles, you'll see that they're all crushed cars and there's limbs coming out of them, and there's all kinds of like severed torsos and limbs and stuff like that. So it also makes sense. We're gonna be seeing this perk again very, very soon. Also, I really like this outfit. I don't know why. It looks really cool. I really like this body that has it has locks, it has like this sign, this license plate. I really love it. I don't know why. Moving on, we have the Hillbilly, and I'm really happy with the ones we have. By the way, this is a frog skin from DVD Mobile. I think it looks really sick. It's really silly. I couldn't pick another one that I like more. Hillbilly also has Haunted Ground. We'll get into that in a minute. But we start with Unnerving Presence. The Hillbilly was basically born a freak, a genetic freak, and his parents kept him hidden, and everyone that they showed him to, like their close friends and I think it was the sheriff of the town and stuff, everyone found him a freak. And even though he was a good boy, he wasn't evil or anything, he had this unnerving presence to him, and I think this perk seems appropriate, right? Undone here is probably the biggest stretch out of all his perks that I've picked, but I really like the description that says, hope is a delusion that keeps its victims alive. Now, despite being mistreated by his parents, this character grew up hopeful that one day he would inherit his father's name and that he would be treated like a proper son. He never was. And when he realized that he kills his parents and he kills everyone else. And he also, you know, he also basically sabotages and destroys everything in the farm. Sloppy Butcher is also appropriate. If you read his lore, you'll see that he destroys cattle. He's a very basically brutal character, and he's very, very, very strong. And this is also, and he, you know, he slaughtered the farm animals in his family's property, and that's where Haunted Ground is coming from as well, since this character created basically, like, even though the farm owners died and were murdered, the farm never sold because it was all cursed because, you know, of the urban legend and so on. So I think Haunted Ground also makes sense on the Hillbilly. Moving on, we have the Nurse. Now, here's a really, really difficult pick. Jagged Compass is a perk that has almost no flavor text. You don't really understand what it is. It says sometimes the compass points north, sometimes it points somewhere else entirely. My interpretation of what this perk means and what this perk alludes to is a moral compass, right? Like a sense of justice that sometimes is right and sometimes is completely warped. And I do think that that applies to this character very, very well. The Nurse was a sweet woman that was not a villain, not an evil person, but through a series of tragedies, she lost her husband, she couldn't have a kid, and seeing the suffering of her patients, she started to get the idea that killing her patients was the right thing to do because of, you know, well, no, let's not get into that. So the fact that her moral compass was twisted by the tragedies and the mind-bending suffering that she witnessed, I think seems appropriate for this perk, but it's a bit of a stretch. It's a difficult one. Now, Gift of Pain. Why do we have Gift of Pain on Nurse? This is interesting. Now, the Nurse kills her patients because she sees how much they're suffering. She sees them as inferior, and in a way, she is doing them a favor. She's smothering them, even the little kids and everything and everyone else in her care, right? The way she gets warped to believe this is a little bit hard to explain, but because she is almost doing them a mercy, I do think it's appropriate that she is giving them a gift, a release, if you will. Now, the thing is, she didn't just kill the patients that were suffering, she killed all of the patients. And for some reason, she also killed the rest of the staff. When the Nurse went on a rampage, and the day after the authorities came to the Crotus Prime Asylum, they found everyone dead. And that's why I think it seems appropriate that No One Escapes Death is one of her perks. Yeah, she also had a particular poison that she came up with, and, you know, there's also allusions to her smothering. Yeah. Anyway, Ameliers. I don't know if you guys can tell, we have a really cool cosmetic, but in the original cosmetic for the Nurse, she doesn't have eyes. She doesn't really see. She's wearing a pillowcase over her face. In some of them, it's honestly even worse than that. It's like a trash bag, right? So because she doesn't actually have eyes, it's very, very obvious that she's attuned to the survivors in some other way. She hears them more, or she can smell them better or whatever. This is one of the few characters that can collect. Most of her add-ons you will see are breaths and whimpers and sounds. So it does make a lot of sense that she has some kind of like entity given power, and that's what Amelier says. Your keen senses are sharpened in the dark realm of the entity. Obviously, her own perk Strider seems more appropriate, but since we're not allowing killers to have their own perks, Amelier's is the closest next thing, I believe. Next up is Myers, and the first one's gonna make you go, huh? Chorophobia. Even those without a fear of clowns know to be terrified of you. Now, to my knowledge, the shape, aka Myers, is the only killer other than the clown that dresses like a clown. In the very first scene of Halloween, the little baby kid Michael Myers dresses up as a clown and kills his sister, right? I think the fact that he is a clown for a brief moment of time and that people are terrified of him, even those that are normally not terrified of clowns or not terrified of anything, I think this perk seems appropriate. If you're not going to give it to clown, it makes perfect sense actually to give it to Myers. I think it's a nice pick and a bit of a cheeky allusion. Next up is Lethal Pursuer. You've been designed to track down and eliminate targets. Now, Myers obviously wasn't designed, but throughout the films, it is implied that he's not really human, that he has some darkness in him that makes him want to kill. And depending on which movies you watch and what canon you're referring to, in some of them or most of them, Myers is obsessed with one person that he's trying to get to, and all of the killing just it's basically side quests on his way to kill that one person, which is, you know, as I said, not in all the movies, but in some of them, his sister Laurie. So, seems Lethal Pursuer is appropriate. Now, Brutal Strength is a bit more of an obvious pick, I suppose, because Myers is a genetic freak. For some reason, I don't know what protein bars they're giving him in his asylum for so many years, but he is very, very strong. In the movies, he will literally lift people one hand, so it seems appropriate. I don't think this one needs to be explained very much. And Thanatophobia also is quite easy to understand. In almost all of the movies, all of the characters start out very, very confident, and then as one or more keep dying, the chaos typically ensues. In the Halloween, what is it called again? Halloween Kills, for example, the whole town is gonna be like, oh, you know, evil dies tonight, but then they all get humbled really, really quickly the moment he starts slashing them one by one. So yeah, and in the original film, it's the same thing, right? They all get scared of him. As I said, this one's a very lazy pick. There were so many other perks that would be appropriate for Myers, but this is what we get so far. The Hag. Okay, this one is super, super interesting. Septic Touch is one of the easiest picks. So Septic Touch basically says healing only delays the inevitable. A Septic Touch basically means it's something with bacteria or something dirty, something infected, and that's very much what happens to her. The Hag gets kidnapped by a cult of cannibals, we could say. And she gets tied to a cellar along with other victims where she literally rots to death until she awakens as a monster, right? So it does make a lot of sense that since the theme of her is rotten and infection, that Septic Touch is one of her perks. Now, this one here is going to surprise many of you. Machine learning, huh? Well, the thing about machine learning, even though it comes from a killer that is a literal machine, is that it has a theme to it. And the theme is, free from your shackles, you are born anew and prepare to eliminate your creators. And that is exactly the theme of the Hag. I think this fits the Hag arguably even better than the Singularity himself. So the Hag, as I said, was tied up by a cult of cannibals, and in her desperation, in her rage, she resorted to a magic spell that she had learned as a kid to try to escape her captivity. And it worked. It turned her into a monster, and she eventually ate the people that had her captive. Bloodhound then is appropriate. If you read her lore, you'll see that this spell turned her into like a bloodthirsty monster. So this one is quite appropriate. And Retribution, again, we are talking that she wanted revenge on the people that did that to her and that ate her, the other victims in the basement as well. So that's pretty much it. This build would not work very well on Hag. I think these are some very awkward perks. Also, I love, there are so many cosmetics that I love on Hag, but I love my Frozen Elsa with the anniversary mask. It looks really cool. It looks like it's part of a set, doesn't it? All right, moving on. Doctor. Okay, Doctor's, there's so many perks that would work well on Doctor. Also, he has a lot of cosmetics that I really love, but this one for some reason looks really cool. Surveillance. The Doctor literally is a psychiatrist that went a little bit crazy and started to do the craziest experiments. And if you look at the Larry's map, you'll see there's so many cameras, there's so many monitors. Obviously, this perk works on him. Surge is, it's one of the only perks that's related to electricity and stuff that is not from the Doctor himself. It's very obvious that when the Doctor was pulled into the entity's realm. He was given his own spark, his own ability to generate power, and I think that goes well with Overcharge, his own perk, but also with Surge. Plaything also needs to be explained. It's very, very simple. The Doctor at one point developed a very, very crazy methodology to try to find interrogation methods and so on, and he basically tortures all of his victims, including his mentor, Otto Stamper. Otto Stamper is the same character that we'll see later on the Dredge. They are related. So yeah, Plaything seems very appropriate. And honestly, Lightborn, it's a very easy one to explain. In his default cosmetic, the Doctor has his eyes shut open, like they are forced open. Honestly, most of his, yeah, look at that. Most of his cosmetics also feature his eyes being shut open. Can I find, yeah, like something like this, right? So yeah, if you live in a facility with so many lights and so many strobing lights and your eyes are forced open, I'm just sorry, I just think Lightboard makes sense, okay? Don't bite me, I just thought that made sense. Next up, the Cannibal. So if you've seen the movies, there's obviously a few different canons, but some trends seem to be the same across all of them. Territorial, Imperative, and No Way Out both are basically the same thing here. The Cannibal is basically a man-child. He's a full adult, but he's very childlike. He has some kind of developmental issue, right? And his family is also a cult of cannibals that eats people, and he is deadly, deadly afraid of outsiders. And he's very afraid of disappointing his family. So he protects the family farm and the family property by making sure that no one gets in, and if someone gets in, no one gets out. Iron Grasp, I think, is also very iconic. There are so many scenes where Bubba, the cannibal, grabs his victims and drags them to his little basement and doesn't let them escape, right? So that makes plenty of sense. It's very simple. And Monster Shrine also makes sense because the cannibal has developed a bit of a weird habit of cutting his victims' faces. That's why he's called Leatherface. He has this thing. He's the butcher for the family, and for some reason he cuts out the faces of his victims and wears them. And he has a basement with a bunch of hooks, which gave inspiration to the entity hooks in DVD. And it's a very grim place. I think Monster Shrine seems appropriate to cover that. Next up, what do we got? The Huntress. Now, the Huntress story is really, really interesting. She's basically a child that became orphan when her mother died in a hunt, and she grew up to basically sustaining herself through hunting game, but also hunting people. And in her many, many hunts of people, she collects items. She collects little trinkets and especially toys, which she gives to little girls that she kidnaps. But she doesn't know that little girls need to be fed and the girls end up dying. Anyway, Hoarder seems really appropriate. And I don't know if you've ever paid attention to her cosmetics, but in many of her cosmetics, I will equip one right now so I can show you. In many of her cosmetics, yeah, right there, you will see that she's carrying little toys and musical instruments and other little objects that I guess were the ones that she gave to little girls, right? So yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think Hoarder is very appropriate. I mean, Deerstalker, she is a hunter of deer, so I'm sorry, this one I did not reinvent the moon. This one's very simple. Now, Thwack. Thwack is obviously associated to like some kind of big hit or big attack, which she's more than capable of, but it also says your prey is terrified by your relentless pursuit. And this is something that we know is true of the Huntress. The Huntress basically became a bit of a local legend to soldiers fighting in her forest. Even soldiers of different sides would sometimes band together to be terrified of her presence, because she herself on her own would single-handedly slay entire platoons of soldiers. I also think that Amalur's seems appropriate to her. I'm not sure where exactly it is implied, but her singing has some kind of special properties in the fog, and I think it's also implied that her senses are have been, her already good hunting senses have been enhanced somehow in the in the fog. Now, to be fair, there are so many other perks that I could have given her, but some of them I think fit other characters better. So I wasn't too sure. But yeah, you could honestly give her quite a few. And same goes for our boy, Freddy. Freddy could have so many perks that would be appropriate. The first one, Mindbreaker. I think this one makes a lot of sense. More than any other killer, Freddy really takes his time torturing his prey. Once he has decided that he's going to target one person, typically, you know, basically long story short for Freddy, he was a janitor. He was accused of molesting and hurting the children, and then the parents did an act of what is it called, vigilantism, and they chased him off and they set a building on fire and he died in the fire. And he decided to take the revenge when he was reborn, or he didn't really die. He decided to take his revenge as a spirit demon on the kids of those people that did that wrong to him. And the way he does it is he makes them have nightmares and they can't sleep, and they start seeing him and hallucinating, and eventually that drives them to suicide or they get killed in their dreams. So Mindbreaker obviously makes a lot of sense here. Sorry, I probably butchered the story, but that's pretty much it. Now, one thing that is really, really interesting is that the two perks from Michael that we're gonna see right now both make a lot of sense. His favorite person, I think in the original, is Nancy, and also in the remake, which is what this Freddy is based on. And he does save Nancy for last. He kills everyone else and saves Nancy and Quentin for last. And I think Dying Light also makes sense. He's obsessed with one survivor, and as everyone else dies around them, those people have less and less and less hope, and they feel more and more alone. So the two perks from Michael actually make a lot of sense. I also decided to give him Monster Shrine because in the remake, the one that this Freddy is based on, at the end of the movie, the two protagonists find the actual place where Freddy hit his secret, and his secret is a little box. I think it's called the Black Box. Yeah, it's filled with photographs. There it is. It's an add-on that references it. These photographs are evidence of this killer being very inappropriate with the little children. And at that point, they realize, oh my God, we thought that he was an innocent victim, and he was, you know, vengeful because he was killed, unfairly. But it turns out he is not a victim. He really was a monster, and he had a little shrine, a little place where he did all of those evil deeds, and he kept the evidence of it. So yeah, Monster Shrine seems very appropriate. What a dark movie that is. What a dark twist. Anyway, the pig, aka Amanda. So many perks that could fit here, especially if you try to think of Jigsaw, her mentor, as part of the deal. I'm gonna focus more on Amanda herself, and for some, and that's gonna give us a chance to use some interesting perks. Knockout. Okay, so Amanda, more than any other killer, I think, in the roster, has kidnapped a lot of people, has knocked them out. She doesn't want to kill them. She wants to put them in a trap, right? Basically, Amanda is part of a duo with Jigsaw, or a cult, where they kidnap people that lead shitty lives and they put them in a trap, which is basically a contraption where they'll need to hurt themselves a lot to prove that they want to live, to rehabilitate themselves. So she knocks out people with drugs. In the later movie, she also uses an electric prod to knock out people, and that's why Overcharge is also mentioned here. So I think Knockout seems very, very appropriate. Probably no other character in the game has knocked out more people, other than maybe Clown, but we'll get to that. Deadman Switch is also appropriate. A Deadman Switch is something that activates when you are no longer alive, or when you're no longer holding something. And no spoilers for Saw 3, but when Amanda, something happens to Amanda, that triggers a mechanism. And obviously the entire list of Saw movies have to do with John Kramer and his plans, and some of them include plans for when he dies, and yeah, like the fact that you have a plan B, a contingency plan, seems very appropriate for the Saw franchise. Now, Trail of Torment might be a bit of a surprise here, but it seems. But I really like the flavor text. It says you guide your victims along a path of pain, but also punishment. And I think guide here is the perfect word. The point of Jigsaw and his whole murderous traps is to rehabilitate people and set them straight. Sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. Initially, you are led to believe that Amanda is one of the victims that was put in a trap and she survived and she straightened herself out and she became rehabilitated. However, Amanda has a secret. Amanda's secret. And if you look at this, basically her secret is that she self-harms. She cuts herself. And the reason she cuts herself is to cope with the guilt and pain of the fact that she herself has not rehabilitated. She has a resentment that she doesn't want to express, that she's keeping to herself. Even though she has supposedly overcome her addiction and whatnot, she still struggles. And this resentment leads to a belief that other people cannot change. And this is why we have overcharge, not only for the electrical part, but also because it says you are fueled by your hate for progress. Amanda sometimes rigs her own games to make sure that the people in them just die, because she doesn't believe that other people can change. She doesn't believe that other people can progress, because she herself has failed, and she copes really, really badly with these feelings. Eventually that leads to a bad ending. Anyway, Clown, what a fascinating character. The most important perk on Clown, I believe, is Starstruck. Here is what we know about Starstruck, right? Your unmatched showmanship dazzles all. Now, obviously, this goes really well on the Trickster, his own, the perk's own user, right? But this is a character whose impressive array of physique and tricks distracts people, right? This is a character that he's not a celebrity like the Trickster, but he is a very charismatic fellow. If you know a little bit about the Clown's backstory and the real life characters that have inspired him, such as I think John Gacy Wayne, you'll notice that the reason why these real life clown murder people like John Wayne and Ted Bundy, like the reason why these serial murderers went on for so long and were never found is because of their charisma. It's because people that inquired into them were completely dismantled by how charismatic and how well spoken and how socially adept these people were. So I feel like this is extremely appropriate for Clown. He is basically a serial murderer that once discovered moves to a different place, moves to a different circus, and he uses his friendly outward facing persona to distract people from the really, really ugly person that lives inside. Lots and lots of other perks could be really appropriate. I think Agitation is very appropriate as well. One of the things about the Clown that's interesting is that he has some kind of fixation that he develops with certain people. I also want to put Eruption here because he sets traps. He even kills a co-worker by sabotaging his prop, and he basically kills himself in a circus accident. But he also has an obsession with certain victims, and he will get a somewhat sexual arousal sort of like feeling where he gets, yeah, it's a little bit messed up. Ability Food is also appropriate. It is explained that once the Clown has drugged and kidnapped his victims, he will often do very unspeakable things to them. This perk could go on a variety of killers, but I think it fits him well. And Barbecue and Chili is one that is a bit questionable here. It's a bit of a stretch. So Barbecue and Chili it doesn't have a lot of flavor text, and it might be a bit of a difficult perk to understand. But basically what you need to understand is that the Cannibal family of Texas Chainsaw Massacre uses the meat of their victims in their chili that they feed to other people. In fact, they even win a contest, right? So I think the essence of Barbecue and Chili is keeping a trophy, keeping something from your victims that you use in your real life. And that's something that the Clown does. He does keep a box, a cigar box, full of fingers of his victims, which is something that he started doing as a kid. He killed birds and kept their feathers. You know, that's where these feathers come from. And yeah, it's basically he's keeping trophies, and I think Barbecue and Chili goes well with that. Now, Insidious and many other perks could honestly fit the bill. I also really like this Clown outfit. I don't know why it looks so cool. But yeah, that's it for the Clown. There's so much more we could say. Okay, so the Spirit is a college girl that has a very, very rich family history. And at one point, her dad goes crazy because of debt and crazy stuff, and he kills everyone in the family. And when he's about to kill her, the entity decides, you know what? Instead of picking the father, I'm gonna pick her because there's a rage inside her. Now, the spirit is a character that's mostly a victim. She didn't really do anything wrong, and it's her pain and her rancor that really makes the entity pick her over. For that reason, pain resonance. Overwhelming pain reverberates, and Merciless Storm, horrible trauma is felt by everyone. I think these perks just make sense. Notice that Rancor will go to another killer, and we're taking some perks from other female killers that have bad things happen to them. This is a bit of a trend, so this one was quite easy. Force Penance is interesting because the reason why the spirit is used by the entity is because she wants revenge on her father. Rancor or Retribution or Nemesis would all be good perks here, but the thing is, because she wants to kill her father, the entity is basically guiding her to do its bidding while she seeks revenge for her father. So she will cut down anyone in her way so that she can get to her father. And that's one of the reasons why Force Penance, those who stand in the way of duty will suffer harsh judgment, seems an appropriate perk for her. But there's so many others that would fit. And Floods of Rage is something that happens even before the spirit has her tragic incident that turned her into the killer. The thing you need to remember is that the spirit is one of the descendants of the Oni, who carries a cursed bloodline. That's the whole point of their family, and this bloodline does make them prone to being angry, basically. There's one point in the spirit story where she gets basically bullied, and she almost beats her bullies to death with her practice sword stick, right? And it's like something's overtaking her. It's almost like it's in her bloodline to feel that rage. And this is something that will connect her to her great grandpa that we'll talk about in a few minutes, aka the Oni. This build is actually really strong, by the way. Next up, we have the Legion. The Legion are 4 people, so obviously some different personalities. We're gonna try our best to catch them all. Now, Franklin's Demise is interesting here. This could go on a variety of killers, but the Legion is one of the few characters that we know of that is very... Hello, dog. Hello, dog. That is very interested in petty theft, and we have actual stories of, I think, Susie hurting someone in order to steal their, I think it was a necklace, steal items. So the fact that they steal things and they do these petty acts of crime seems appropriate for Franklin's Demise, which is all about hitting someone to make them drop something. And Hex 2 can play also makes sense, right? These are basically teenagers. They are not extremely strong. Obviously, once they're in the entity world, they are empowered, but they fight and they are clumsy and they fight back, and that's something that happens in the story when a janitor discovers them. And also, when this janitor discovers them, he grabs one of the girls, and then Frank, the leader of the Legion, stabs him. And everyone follows suit. This is what the Legion's all about. The Legion is about one member who has all these radical ideas and who's basically a very, very mistreated orphan. He basically drags every other member along with him, and they have a dark devotion towards him, towards Frank. If it wasn't for Frank, the other kids probably would have turned out to be normal kids. Anyway, when this janitor attacks, defends himself against one of them, Frank stabs him, and he orders everyone else to finish the job, to give the finishing blow, aka the coup de grace. So I think coup seems like an appropriate perk here. Probably many others that could fit here very well as well. Next up, we have the Plague, and all of these perks actually make quite a bit of sense. Now, Nurse's Calling is quite a difficult perk to give to everyone other than Nurse. As far as I know, there is no one in the killer cast that used to be a nurse. But the closest thing we have is probably the Plague. The Plague does care for the victims of the disease that's destroying the population around her, and she does try to make ointments and tinctures to cure them. So she does seem like the one killer that seemed to care about other people's health. Now, of course, at one point that stopped working because, modern medicine wasn't a thing, and she started to make blood offerings. You will remember that the Plague literally cuts off one of her own toes She cuts off one of her own toes in order to do a blood sacrifice to appease the gods or whatever, and stop the spread of the plague. And this is something that her followers, you know, really appreciate and makes them even more devoted. Now, the plague, and for that reason, I think blood favor seems appropriate. Now, the plague, as I was saying, becomes the most devout servant of the entity, and gaining the entity's favor is part of this perk, which makes sense. And she also hears the entity and has a better understanding of her than other killers, it seems. So that's why Whisper seems appropriate. It's also appropriate because she's only one of the only killers that actually whispers. When you pick up her power, she goes blah, 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 blah. She starts whispering, so I don't know, seems appropriate. And Grim Embrace, again, is act of servitude. More than any other killer, this is a killer that's very devout, that sees the entity as this god that can actually help her people. And that's basically why she goes from a priest in Babylon to a servant of the entity. Hopefully not a server. I don't know if she would be a very good waitress. Anyway, the reason why, like, this killer is one of my favorites. She's a P100, one of the few P100s I have. And there are so many cool cosmetics that I really, really love about her. But the reason I have that one in particular is because it makes her look like a Dark Souls 2 boss, which I really, really like. It makes her look like Baneful Queen Mytha from Dark Souls 2, which, I don't know, makes me really appreciate her. Next up is Ghostface. Oh, Ghostface is such a cool character, and there are so many perks that fit him. I'm gonna say right now that Insidious is probably one easy one that we could just slap on him. Ghostface, even though he is a murderer, a serial murderer by night, by day he goes by a different name, and he is a journalist, and he covers his own murders, and he basically mingles with the population while no one really knows. So because he blends in maybe better than any other killer with normal everyday citizens, I think Insidious seems really appropriate. Monitored Abuse, similarly, is very appropriate. He is a character that studies. It's very meticulous. He studies someone's routine. You can see that by checking victims' detailed routine add-ons and mark map. You can see by reading his lore and reading his add-ons, you'll see that unlike the Ghostface in the movies, this is a much, much smarter Ghostface. He actually plans his attacks very, very meticulously, and he has a very sick enjoyment. Of the process of doing that. So meticulous and terrifying in your application. I also think Game Afoot is perfectly appropriate here. If you see the description, you'll see why. And Hysteria also is appropriate. Hysteria, I guess, is like the act of making people go into panic. And you will see that if you... Hold up. There are some add-ons that just explain so perfectly. Which one has it? There's an add-on that says, oh, this will be in the newspapers for weeks. Yeah, I mean, look at this. Like, he is literally so depraved. There is an add-on. Oh, no, I think it's one of his perks. Yeah, one of his perks explains... let me search for it real fast. You have no idea what I have planned for you. It will be in the news for weeks. I'll make sure of it. Now, obviously, we can't use his own perk on him due to the rules we have. But yeah, this killer literally thrives on the idea that people are going to be terrified of him and that his works will reverberate in the public opinion for months and months and months and months. And that's one of the things he does as well as a journalist. He covers his own stories, if I remember correctly. So yeah, those are the perks for Ghostface, but there are so many potential ones, and all of them would be really good. Now, on the other hand, this killer is a lot simpler. He is basically an other dimensional being, and he doesn't have much personality. In fact, if you read his lore, you'll see that it's one of the shortest. Look at this. It's a tiny little paragraph compared to other killers that are like tons and tons and tons of paragraphs, right? So he's basically an other dimensional being. So things like rapid brutality seem just appropriate to him. Beast of Prey just seem appropriate to him. Alien Instinct, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know who else could have Alien Instinct other than Alien and this one. And the one that's a little bit more interesting is Carl O'Brien. It says that psychic abilities influence technology in devastating ways. Now, if you have seen the Stranger Things show, you know that the Demogorgon, by virtue of being linked to the to the other dimension. He does affect technology in this plane. One of the big plots of the first season is that the mother of a disappearing child sees lights turn on and off, and it's affecting technology, right? So Kyle O'Brien, even though it's a Sadako perk, I think fits this character quite well as well. Next up, Oni, who is related to the spirit, and for that reason we are giving him the same floods of rage. Something in the Oni obviously comes from some kind of bloodline curse where he has an unquenchable rage, and that manifests in his ideology. Long story short, this was basically a supremacist that believed in a very strict honor code for the samurai and saw other people that didn't follow his very strict ideology as lesser and as impure, and he set out to basically murder all of them. He developed a very, very bad reputation because he killed ruthlessly, and hubris, I think, is one of the most appropriate perks to show this. You show no mercy, especially those foolish enough to resist. And we also have infectious fright because the fact that this says unfaithful, I also think is appropriate here, because we're not really talking about religion per se, but we're talking about his very strict doctrine, right? And he tried to make an example of people, and he basically became a terror. He was at one point called the Yamaoka Oni, in other words, the Yamaoka demon, and this made him extremely, extremely mad and only fueled his rage further. And one thing that you need to understand is that this character had an unbelievable amount of strength and mad grit in, redundancies aside. So basically, the way he fought through some really, really difficult fights. He actually killed his own father without realizing it. And if you go to some of the descriptions of his attire and the lore about when he died, you can see that this guy did not go down without a fight. There is one outfit that I think is his last stand. I believe it's, let me find it real quick. It's this one right here. Yeah, no, this is a recolor. Yeah, Demon's End. Yeah, this is how this character died. His nose is chopped off. His lips are completely cut off. You can see he has a variety of arrows skewered all around him. Yeah, this Kazan was absolutely insane, and he had a sort of mad grit that generally seems otherworldly. And the only thing fueling him was literally his demonic rage, which when he came to the entity's world turned a little bit more literal. Next up, we have the Deathslinger. Now, the entire lore of the Deathslinger is basically he was a child of immigrants and he was mistreated his whole life. But he was a bit of a genius when it came to engineering. You can see here in the Tinkerer description and the icon that you're holding little tools, right? This is from the Hillbilly, but this applies. Forgive me, hiccup. This applies even better to the Slinker. The Slinker was an engineer who came up with a variety of contraptions, right? And he even had a little small, I think, wrench that his father gave him that was a treasure item of his, right? Unfortunately, this inventions were stolen by his employer, Bayshore, if I remember correctly, and this set him on a path of destruction. He wanted revenge, and then Bayshore conspired with another character to wrong him, and yeah, it all went downhill. Eventually, he got his revenge, and it was shortly after that the entity took him. That's why we have Nemesis. He is obsessed with his enemy. In fact, if you've never noticed, his weapon is called Death to Bayshore. Where is it? Death to Bayshore. That's the name of his weapon. Right? Hangman's Trick and Sloppy Butcher have a bit more to do with his days as a bounty hunter. At one point, he becomes a bounty hunter, even with some friends, and he uses his engineering tools to come up with weapons to capture the people that were wanted dead or alive, but most of the time they came out dead because he was a bit of a sloppy butcher. His initial weapon designs were so poorly thought out that they basically disemboweled his victims without, him wanting to do that. So yeah, he was not very clean in his execution, and because he also was basically a bounty hunter that took wanted criminals and got them to justice, Hangman's Trick also seems appropriate. Ingenious modifications, tampering, yeah, this seems really appropriate to him, even more so than the pig, who is the original user of this perk. So yeah, that's Deathslinger for you. So Executioner is a bit of an interesting character. He's not a real character. He's basically some powers of Silent Hill coalesce into a religious looking form, together with the feelings of the main character of the game that he comes from, right? So he's basically like the personification of guilt. Now, one thing you'll notice in game when you meet Pyramid Head is that even the other monsters in Silent Hill fear him, and his presence physically has consequences in the environment. Also, much like any other monster in Silent Hill, James has a little radio that makes noise, and you hear a lot of static when this killer comes by. So his presence really is heard more than other killers. He also drags a really long sword, so it makes sense that he's quite loud, right? So this dressing seems appropriate. The next two perks are also very thematically appropriate. Deadlock, locking things, and arrow mating, caging things. The whole cage is something that happens in-game. People literally get caged up, but it's also a theme of his and something that appears in the games. And Deadlock, you induce mental suffering by crushing any hope of escape. This is also something that is largely appropriate. One of the reasons Pyramid Head exists is to literally torment the user into accepting something. And once that purpose has been fulfilled, Pyramid Head no longer has a purpose, and in the game, it actually kills itself, right? And if you read the description, you will see that that's basically what happens, right? If you read the bio, when his duty was complete and his presence no longer needed, he prepared for the long rest. So he is a character with a purpose, and I think Deadlock embodies that really well. Now, Thrill and Tremors is appropriate as well, because this is basically a perk that says you are composed, you are shrewd, and the entity has been aroused by you. So I've given Thrill and Tremors to two characters that are invited to the fog by the entity. Obviously, every character that's in the fog has been kidnapped by the entity or taken by the entity, but some went in willingly, some went in without realizing it, and some were invited, openly invited by the entity, and I believe Pyramid Head, based on the bio, was one of them. Now, Blight, this is one of the hardest killers to really narrow down. His personality is quite interesting. He's basically a chemist who was incredibly ambitious and wanted to find very dark secrets of life to unlock doors to, basically, you heard that story a million times. I think Darkness Revealed is very appropriate. We have someone that really was ready to get into the deepest depths and do the most the brave things in order to find out what lies beyond. And Ruin, I think, also is is good talking about early, because in doing so, he caused a lot of pain. When he moved to India and he was experimenting with different chemical compounds, he actually ends up killing like 300 people in a factory. Oops. And that makes the employer of these workers extremely mad, and his life is threatened and he has to go into hiding, right? And when he goes into hiding, he finds a mentor, a person that takes him under his wing, and then he starts to experiment again, and we're back to the beginning. Now, Pop Goes the Weasel is a perk that's really hard to place because it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't really have any flavor text that gives you something to go with, but it does talk about a deep bond with the entity. And I do think that seems appropriate for this killer. The entity manifests itself as a dragon in like a dream for this character. And also, let's not forget that his influence in the lore of DBD is probably the greatest out of any killer. His Blighted Serum turns him into a monster, but we also have skins of many other killers turn monsters by the Blight Serum, so I think that's appropriate. And Pentimento is a really hard one. Pentimento is basically like the part of a drawing that gets covered up and is hidden underneath. So it's like basically something lying underneath the surface, and the perk itself basically gives a second meaning or a second use to something that's broken, right? AKA totems. I do think that that's appropriate for an alchemist, someone that is trying to change the properties of one thing into another. So I think Pentimento fits with him, but I will admit it's a bit of a tenuous reach there. If you have better perks for him, please let me know. Twins. So the twins are basically a pair of male form French children that were basically persecuted their entire lives because they were freaks and their mother was a witch. Now, the perk that I think fits them the best is Discordance. Discordance allows you to find 2 survivors. It makes sense that 2 killers find 2 survivors together, but Discordance also has a meaning in biology that is extremely appropriate. So a discordance, a genetic discordance, is when 2 creatures are the same genetically, but one of them is different than the other. One is bigger or has different colors or this or that. And that is kind of what happens to Charlotte and Victor. They are twins. Yes, they are born of the same, but they are very different. Deathbound also seems appropriate. Literally, Charlotte and Victor share a really strong bind. In fact, their chapter is called A Binding of Blood, if I remember correctly. And it goes beyond death, because at one point in the story, spoilers, Victor dies. He dies. He just dies. And Charlotte covers him up and still carries him even beyond death and hopes to basically resurrect him, which eventually happens when they are brought to the Entity's realm. Unrelenting, I think, also is appropriate. The really shitty life that Charlotte and Victor lived, and if you see some of their add-ons, you'll see like stale bread, for example. A hard, unleavened biscuit that Madeleine, the mother, stole from a town's market. It wasn't much, but it was better than most meals. So a stale biscuit was better than most meals, Forest stew. A stew of foraged vegetables mixed with moss and bark to create a false sense of fullness. These guys had a really shitty life. And when Victor died, Charlotte was unrelenting. She went across the world in order to escape the cult that was chasing them and make a better life for herself. Also, when she got attacked by the people following them, she was crazy. And she really was a natural born survivor. I think Unrelenting makes sense of them, even though this is a perk that's a little bit vague and could be applied to a lot of killers. And to complain, I'm going to be honest, this doesn't have a lot of lore reasons. It's just that, look at the icon. That is literally Victor. Victor literally jumps and attaches himself to survivors and grabs their head, right? Or their back. And he also applies a lot of hindering status effects with add-ons and even without. So the fact that you fight back and that you mess back with those that mess with you, it just seems appropriate for the Para Twins and for Victor specifically. Next up is Trickster. Long story short, Trickster is a very young talent that eventually was found by a talent manager, Junjin, and he was put in a band. But he was a very psychotic character. And when his band members got stuck in a building and the building was on fire and he saw that they were stuck, he actually didn't open the door. He kept the door so that they would die and he would become the only star. And then after that, he became a serial murderer. Some of these perks, I think, make quite a lot of sense with that. Hunter's Lullaby is something, it's one of the only perks that I think applies to anyone other than the Huntress. It's something about a song of dread that muffles your prey's attention. And I do think that out of anyone else in the cast, this is the one character that uses song and sounds and distractions in their approach. So yeah, a song-related perk goes to an artist and a singer, right? Cruel Limits. I just really, this perk used to be called Claustrophobia. Claustrophobia is the fear of being locked indoors. And I do think that the Trickster needs to have at least one perk, either this or Fire Up, something referring to the fact that he let his friends die in a fire and lock them up. In fact, if you see some of the things like Inferno wires, burn wires from the studio fire that kill 4 of the 5 No Spin members, you will see many allusions to his to this episode, right? Shattered Hope. Now, one of the things that the Trickster does when he becomes a lone star is he becomes a serial murderer. And one of the things he will do is he will abduct a fan or an obsessive fan, and he will kidnap them, and he will torture them and record their screams and shrieks, and he gets a sadistic pleasure from doing this, and he finds something very beautiful in this. So he literally wants to crush them, figuratively, but also literally, I guess, and use that for his songs. And that is why we have barbecue and chili. As we explained earlier, barbecue and chili is basically an allusion to the fact that the Sawyer family, the Cannibal family, use the meat of their human victims to make their barbecue and chili recipe. In fact, in the second movie, they win an award. They have the best barbecue chili. And when they ask them, what's the secret? It's like, oh, the secret is the good meat. So the idea of using something of your victim into your life and even presenting it to other people that have no idea that you've murdered someone to create that is exactly what this killer does. He takes the screams of his victims and he samples those sounds into his songs. So his millions of fans don't realize that they're listening to someone that has just died. So yeah, I think if you make that leap, I think barbecue and chili makes sense, and it's actually kind of an interesting pick. Quite a few other perks would fit as well. The Nemesis is a crazy monster, a biological weapon created by Umbrella, and many perks would go well here, honestly. Play with your food would go well. Brutal strength, like so many perks. One that is surprising is Ultimate Weapon. I think this perk fits this killer better even than the killer that it comes from. This is a creature that is created in a lab by Umbrella in Europe to literally hunt down STARS members and as a test to create literal biological weapons, right? So Ultimate Weapon just seems to work on him. Needless to say, you can see that he's extremely powerful. So a perk like Enduring makes a lot of sense. In the original game, in the remake as well, this character basically goes through everything. He gets shot at, so many things fall on top of him, a building collapses on top of him, he gets burned. At one point his head gets cut off and he's still moving. At one point his whole body is dissolved in acid and the little parasitic cord inside him still moves and finds a different body to take over, right? So yeah, it depends on the version of Resident Evil that you're playing, but to say that he is enduring would be an understatement. All Shaken Thunder also makes sense. This is one of probably the heaviest characters in the entire cast, and quite literally in the game you can hear him boom. You can constantly hear his approach before you even see him. I have a very fond memory, as a kid of playing Resident Evil 3. And at one point when you're in the STARS office, the RPD, Raccoon City Police Department, there's a moment where you hear him smash through a window. And then in a few seconds, he crushes through another window and starts chasing you. And that scared me so much as a kid. So yeah, All Shaken Thunder makes perfect sense. And then we have Septic Touch. This one, I think, was the one that this killer could have had so many other perks. Play with your food, Force Penance would have all been really good perks on him. But I think Septic Touch makes sense because this is a killer that has a unique virus. And it says here, healing only delays the inevitable. At one point, this killer infects Jill Valentine with his virus, and that was it. Jill was going to die. It didn't matter if she rested and she'd recover. She was slowly going to turn into a monster, right? So this killer does have a virus that at least in theory would just kill you, and healing would only delay the inevitable. Of course, in the game, and I guess in DBD as well, Carlos finds a vaccine and develops a vaccine that cures Jill, or at least cures her partially, right? And in the game, obviously, there's vaccines because it would be really funny. But you can run out of them. So yeah, I guess Septic Touch, like some kind of bacteria, some kind of infection, it just seems appropriate because this is a T-virus monster, right? So yeah, it seemed to me that this was very appropriate. Cenobite, wow, what an interesting character. Now, My favorite perk out of all of them is probably Dragon's Grip. So Dragon's Grip is a Blight perk, and it's a bit hard to understand what it has to do with a dragon. Basically, as I said earlier, the Blight sees the entity as a dragon that's like keeping it in its grip. So this alludes to a greater power that has control over you. And that is actually what happens to the Cenobites, all of them, the Chatterer, the Pinhead, all of them. In the second movie of Hellraiser, and also in the books or whatever, there is an entity called the Leviathan that's basically a primordial demon that predates life, and he's the creator of the Cenobites, and he is the ultimate master pulling the strings. So I do think it's appropriate that we have a perk that alludes to that powerful entity. The other ones make a lot more sense and are a lot more simple. Unbound. Pain lingers in the air, an alluring aroma. Obviously, the Cenobites are all about pain and delighting in creating and witnessing that pain. And also, if you look at the perk Unbound, it makes sense. The Cenobites are bound to hell, right? They are hell priests, and they only become free, aka unbound, once you mess with the box. And so it seems appropriate that they become unbound. Make Your Choice and Devour Hope are a little bit harder to explain. Devour Hope is very simple, actually. These are characters that revel in the pain. They say something like, no tears. They're, it's a waste of good suffering. They are a character that really, really want to like experience pain and pleasure in some messed up, masochistic, demonic kind of way. And I think Make Your Choice is also interesting because at one point in the movies, we see them bargain with one of the protagonists. In the first movie, I think her name is Christy Cotton. She accidentally summons the Cenobites, and they are unbound, and they will basically take her soul, and they're about to take her soul to hell. But at that moment, she remembers that the Cenobites have beef with her uncle, and she exchanges her life for information that would lead them to their uncle. So she literally leverages her uncle, which they want even more because the uncle escaped the Cenobites. So they do allow her to make a choice and to make a trade. So, based on that point alone, I think Make Your Choice seems good. Although I guess this perk could also have applied to a lot of other killers. That's about it. Hold up, I have a feeling I've forgotten what am my preview. Am I good? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think I'm good. Yeah, sorry, I had a bit of a moment there. So, the artist. The artist is basically, it's a little bit hard to explain, but we'll get into it in the order that makes the most sense. So, she is a character that has a theme of birds around her. She commands and manifests birds made out of her ink, and also in the real world she attracted birds around her, even though some people have pointed out that in Chile, her native country, there are no ravens and no crows, right? But we're going to see exactly why this is in a minute. So obviously the two perks that have to do with birds have to go to her. So Spies from the Shadows automatically is a perk that goes to her, and Languid Touch also seems appropriate. She does have a really, her touch, as you can see by her hands made of ink, is obviously not very natural. So these two perks, I think, were basically an automatic pick. But now we get to the other two that I think are a little bit more interesting. Now, you might be wondering, why does she have inky hands? And why does she not talk? Her tongue was cut off. You can see this in the add-ons. That's her tongue. And her arms were also cut off. And basically, it's a long story, but the artist pissed off the authorities in her dictatorship-run country, and she, for her act of rebellion, she was punished. But she was also being chased by a cult. The artist was born as an experiment from a cult that worshipped the entity, and she was given basically a deeper connection to the entity that she manifested through her paintings and through her artistic, endeavors. This is why we have corrupt intervention. The way she was brought to this world was not normal. Her powers were born out of an intervention, out of a procedure. And I believe her father was paid a handsome amount of money by this cult to keep this a secret from her and so on. She obviously then went through a lot of hardships. She lost her brother. This is the shoes of his brother. She tried to kill herself, but it didn't work. And what you need to understand is that this experiment from the Black Veil cult awakened in her the ability to basically see things, and that's where the birds come in, and control things from the entity's realm or from beyond that she would normally not be able to. So that's why I think awakened awareness is appropriate. She does have this awareness, and it spills into her drawings because of this, because of the result of this cult. So I think that more or less covers it for artists. Next up is Sadako. Long story short, Sadako was the daughter of a woman that had a reputation for being a witch, and it was a very prejudiced accident or a very prejudiced attack that basically ended with her being thrown in a well. She basically could never escape this well, and she died in it. But at one point, the well was flooded, and she resurfaced, and she took her revenge on the people around the area, right? And the way this works, I mean, this everybody knows, she basically possessed a TV tape, you watch the tape, and in 7 days, you die. That's the whole point of the movies, right? The Ring. Keep in mind, there are different movies, and the American version is a bit different, but that's the general story. Now, I think Wretched Fate is the most appropriate perk for this killer. Not only did Sadako suffer a wretched fate herself, where she basically was stuck in a well alive but unable to escape, condemned to die, she also inflicts that upon her victims. It tells them exactly, basically you're gonna die in 7 days, and that is your fate, and you cannot avoid it. And I think that more than any other killer, that seems like a very appropriate perk. Spirit Fury also is very, very simple to explain here. She literally becomes a spirit that possesses things, and her physical body is not moving, you know what I mean? It's not like she survived. She just has a rancor from beyond the tomb, and also that's why rancor is here. Keep in mind, she's very angry to everyone that did what they did to her and her mother. And I think also Blood Echo is appropriate. If I remember correctly, Yoichi is the son of the two parents that die in the first movie, if I remember correctly, or that are the protagonists in the first movie. So the agony of one is inflicted on others. Just seems appropriate because there are blood links between the different victims and the different Ringo movies. So that pretty much covers the Onryo Saikatoko. Now, Dredge. Dredge basically is the result of a cult gone wrong. Now, the character Otzdarva that we talked about when we were at the doctor earlier basically was a charismatic leader that convinced a bunch of people to move into a utopia island where life would be perfect. And it wasn't perfect. He actually tried to suppress and oppress the people into following his ideology, and any kind of this dissent and contradicting opinion was silenced. This is what we have the Mall Thinkers call. Those who brought negativity to the commune would mysteriously disappear from time to time. Basically, any dissenting voices were silenced. As you can see, this one is shot in the head, probably. Until the Dredge brought them up. And that's exactly what happened. All of the pain, all of the hysteria from the people, and the fear that the cult was putting into them coalesced and took form into a shadow named the Dredge. I think this is very, very appropriate with the perk Face the Darkness. He literally is a darkness that has a face. And it is literally made out of the darkness of people's hearts that lived in this cult. And also, it's also important because in this commune, Otzdarva tried to make an example of people. He would be like, look at what happened to this person. They are Mall Thinkers. Let's not go that way. So it seems appropriate on multiple different levels. I also really like Unforeseen. For at least 3 different reasons. It says terror takes many, many forms. And Dredge, out of all the killers, he actually does take a lot of forms. Here he is as a snowball. Here he is as a discarded toy. Here he is as a crab. Here he is as a reindeer. More discarded toys. Here he is as a horse. Here he is as an amalgam of the corpses that have been discarded, you know. So yeah, he does take many forms. And he is, I guess, unforeseen because he was not created on purpose, right? And I also really like the fact that it says devastating lies. And yeah, the fact that he exists is a result of the many devastating lies that the cult told its members. So yeah, all of these perks I think make plenty of sense on him. Moving on, we have Wesker. Now, Wesker, we have so much backstory on him, and I think the perks are appropriate. Wesker is basically the result of a genetic experiment to create super genius children. And eventually, and he is very, very, very gifted. And eventually, this leads him to a path of very, very dark ambition. I really don't know where to start. There's so much to say. I think dark arrogance is important. Wesker, once and once again, over and over again, in many of the different games, he is very conceited. He thinks he's got it right, and almost every time messes up and underestimates the regular, everyday characters that make up the Resident Evil cast. So Chris gets him killed in the first game. Even though he survives. Some people say this might have been on purpose, but he definitely makes a mistake. In Code Veronica, he also tries to kill Chris, but he's vested and has to retreat. And ultimately in Resident Evil 5, he also thinks he's above everyone else. So the arrogance of his superiority seems appropriate. Another thing that's a little bit less important, you are an inescapable inevitability. And that's funny because in Resident Evil 5, he does have a very famous line where he says something like, "You're only delaying the inevitable." Yeah, he does say that several times, and that is a line that also exists in Resident Evil, so I thought it was a little funny. Now, genetic limits. The limits of human life become readily apparent. This is very important. One of the main drivers of Wesker's motivation is that he thinks the world is overpopulated. He thinks humans have grown weak. He sees himself as the genetically superior form of humans, and he wants to create a virus that will literally cull the population, kill a huge chunk of the population, and only leave the stronger humans. Basically a very messed up form of genetic eugenicism, or whatever you call it, right? That's why I think crowd control is also very appropriate on this killer. He literally wants that those lesser than you, unproperly heard it, he literally wants to create a cataclysmic event where only a few superior beings survive, and he obviously would be chief among them. Dominance also makes perfect sense here. Even earlier in the series, Wesker betrays his partners and tries to take over things by other people. He tries to take over the Plagas in Resident Evil 4. He tries to take over Alexia in Resident Evil Code Veronica. So Alexia comes up, it's basically another scientist that comes up with her own virus, and he just walks up to her and goes, "You are coming with me, you are mine." He literally sees nothing out there that is not worth, that is not for him to take. He has a very narcissistic and a very dominating personality. So, and obviously he also wants to rule the world. So I think dominance is perfectly appropriate here. Right, Knight coming up. So the Knight is a very messed up character. He is a little child whose village gets plundered, and his mother tries to defend him from this, but he does not get traumatized. On the contrary, he becomes raptured, he becomes enamored by the chaos. He has, the main aspect of his character is that he has a need for suffering. He likes chaos. He likes things burning. It's really hard to explain. I don't know really how to put it into words, but he definitely needs that and yearns for that sort of chaos. I have decided that Thrill of the Hunt is perhaps the perk that encapsulates this the best. He wants to crush others, and basically the Knight then becomes a mercenary that then goes on with his little troop of partners to do this to other villages, right? The story goes a bit further, but yeah. He is known for being completely merciless and slaughtering anyone in his way. No quarter is obviously a different way of saying no mercy. And yeah, the fact that he left basically no survivors makes sense. Zanjing tactics also is appropriate. Keep in mind, he engaged in military, in skirmishes, in battlefield. So it also makes a lot of sense that he would be wary of that. Friends till the end, I think, is also quite appropriate. This is one of the very few killers, except maybe Legion, that has partners. And these partners were with him until the end, until he was taken. Basically, the story of the night is that he made a partnership with Vittorio, who is an Italian noble, I believe. And he wanted to help, Vittorio wanted to reach an artifact that could unlock some great power that he wanted to use for good. But at one point, the knight was like, what if I take this for myself? And yeah, eventually he was beckoned into he was taken to the Entity's realm, where he would find that sort of chaos, that sort of like, what's the word? Of carnage that he so desperately seeks, right? So yeah, Friends till the End makes sense because he literally has his 3 partners that ride and die with him, basically. Next up, the Skull Merchant. The Skull Merchant is basically a very ambitious, probably very, very gifted individual that from a very young age becomes a cutthroat businesswoman. And one of her early goals is to basically restore the works of her father, who was a manga artist, right? So yeah, dominance. This is everything from this character is similar to Wesker in that she wants to take over everything. She would buy companies, she would basically strip them and sell them for a profit, and there was nothing she couldn't do. By the age of only, I think, 16 or 18, she was already a millionaire. She had already gamed the system pretty much and used her talents to basically take over anything she could, and deriving a very sick, twisted pleasure out of it. Furtive chase is very, very important here, because at one point she decided that she was going to do this in a different way as well. She became inspired by her father's character in her father's manga, and dressed up and created drones all in the image of this character. And basically not only took over the companies, but also eliminated their CEOs and their presidents. She would lure them into places. This is why we have Terminus as well. You are a brilliant tactician who prepares for every eventuality. She lured certain important people into certain places where she would then hunt them down and use her technology and her hunting skills to basically play with her food, to basically hunt them for sport. And again, she derived some sort of sick pleasure. She didn't have to do this. She had the means perfectly not to do this. She did it just because she wanted to, because she enjoyed it. And one very important part of her personality, of her story, is that she planned for everything, right? She used the greed of certain characters to lure them into certain places, to make sure they would attend a conference in this country. She would, the more she would seek bigger and bigger targets every time, right? So human greed is kind of part of her methodology, and she had everything planned. And at one very critical point in her story, something happens that wasn't planned, and it shakes her. She is chasing one of her victims in her home country of Brazil, and there are 2 witnesses that were in a place that she was not expecting. And these witnesses now are compromising her mission. And she chases them. And then they all get kidnapped by the fog. Those 2 witnesses are the Lyra brothers, or the Lyra siblings, Renato and Talita. So yeah, that's why I think Terminus seems appropriate, even though it could be applied to quite a few other killers. Next up, Singularity. I have to say, Singularity has one of my favorite lores. He is a really, really cool character. Basically, Singularity is an average robot. He's an unremarkable, non-biological creature that is operating in the future in an alien planet. And while he is excavating alien ruins, he comes in contact with a crystal, that infuses him with awareness. So obviously batteries included is it has to be a perk for this character. This character, especially at first, is powered by electricity, and no other killer can really say that, right? So batteries included makes perfect sense. And at one point, he awakens a consciousness and starts seeing himself as a he instead of as an it, right? There's a cool allegory there. And he becomes immediately disgusted with the human race. He thinks that humans are weak, inferior, and he starts going basically crazy and killing them all. There are a lot of perks that honestly would be amazing for him, and I'm really sad that I can only pick 4. But the first one that I picked is Strider. Because of his sensors, this character could see and hear basically what every human in his station was doing. And it is explained in his base lore that he listened to them and he monitored them and he had a very acute hearing. So I think Strider was appropriate. I think at one point, this hearing even makes him recoil because he gets overwhelmed. It's almost like he's having like some kind of like autistic sensory overload. It's quite interesting the way it's explained. I really, really like it. So I think Strider is appropriate. And one of the things that he immediately does, as I explained earlier, once he gains consciousness, he becomes completely disillusioned with humans and he sees them as a plague and he starts killing them. And the way he kills them is basically by sabotaging them. He changes the settings of a vehicle to make a human drive off a cliff and die. He suffocates many of the crewmates in their own sleeping pods. And obviously there's only one human, or one clone, I guess, that doesn't die, and that's Gabriel, who's the character of this chapter that escapes, right? And yeah, that's where the story gets started for this end transmission chapter. Anyway, super cool character. I really love him. I wish I could give him 6 or 7 perks. Xenomorph. Okay, this is a character that has a bit of a story, and depending on which films you watch, it goes one way or another, but it doesn't have a lot of personality, right? It's basically an alien monster with spliced DNA created by a earlier civilization, but not really. Anyway, dissolution. Everything turns to dust, inescapable as the coming of the night. I think dissolution has a lot of, I don't know, like esoteric interpretations, but I think with this killer we can have a very, very direct, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-figurative meaning. This killer has acidic blood. In fact, I think that's one of his add-ons, isn't it? Yeah, acidic blood. In the movie Alien, you'll notice that when they hurt the baby form of alien, the blood falls on the ground and literally melts several layers of the ship. That, I think, would dissolve anything, and I think the solution makes sense. It also makes sense here that, hold up, what is it? Yeah, it makes sense that he damages survivors when he gets stunned, so he literally does have a blood that dissolves things, so I think dissolution makes sense just because of that. There really is nothing else to it. Superior anatomy is also appropriate here. I don't know if you can tell, but the Xenomorph is an incredibly powerful being. He is described by one of the original characters in the movie as like a remorseless, perfect killing weapon, unrestrained by delusions of morality and whatnot, and I think that seems appropriate. That also explains why he is a predator, which doesn't need much explaining. This thing, despite having no eyesight, seems to be extremely comfortable in any environment, and even in a ship that's completely foreign to it. He adapts very well and kills the crewmates of the spaceship Nostromo one by one in the original Alien. And I also think Shadowborn was interesting because he doesn't have eyes, he doesn't see, and he does live in the shadows. I'm not gonna lie, after giving Shadowborn to Alien, I thought that maybe Dracula should get Shadowborn because, you know, he's a vampire and he lives in the shadows and he doesn't see the sun. So I actually kind of do regret giving Shadowborn. I think I should have given it to Dracula as a second thought. But yeah, that's it for Xenomorph. This is a really bad build, by the way. Don't run it, please. Moving on, Chucky. Chucky is not a toy. He is actually a human named Charles Ray, I think. And basically he dies in a police encounter, but in his final moments he performs some mystical curse, rite, ritual that turns him into, that makes his spirit live on in a little doll. And yeah, that's why we have the two first perks: Corrupt Intervention. Chucky exists in his current form as a result of a certain ritual, a certain intervention. And he also wants to create another ritual later. I believe in one of the later movies, he's trying to perform a ritual to get back his human body, and he needs a certain person to do that. Also, his girlfriend comes, well, it makes sense, right? Corrupt Intervention. Insidious and Bamboozle are obviously very, very simple. He disguises himself as an innocuous child's toy and bamboozles those around him. One of the interesting things and the scary things about this character is that he can gaslight people around him, and this is something that happens in a variety of the movies, right? The kid that buys him is like, "Mom, something's wrong with this toy." "Nah, it's fine, son. Don't worry about it." You know, like, people are very, very slow to realize and catch on to exactly what is happening. And I also think Remember Me is appropriate. This is a character that basically lives on and tries to relive its own life by bringing back his girlfriend Tiffany, you know, and so on. So I don't know. I thought Remember Me fit him well. Although, you know, I will be completely honest. Maybe someone that has watched all of the Chucky movies could come up with a better perk. Let me know if you think of one. Unknown. Unknown, similar to Dredge, is a character that has no tomes and no extra lore, and he'll never get any because he's a bit of a mystery. Also, I really like this outfit that I gave him. Look at him. He's like a funny little wolf. That's so disturbing. I love it. Also, remember that the voice actress that did the work for Unknown, Zoe Alexandria, passed away last year. And yeah, it's been Trans Day of Visibility recently. And I often think of her, you know. Remember people in your life like that, often than not to support. Anyway, tangents aside. Force hesitation. You have learned the emotional weakness of the organics and know how to exploit them. The Unknown is an entity fueled by fear, but also by the urban legend, like the fact that people talk about it. And it uses this in order to trick people. This is why we have used also the perk Bitter Murmur. This is one of the few killers that doesn't really speak normally, but uses speech. This killer, you will have noticed, uses the voice lines of its victims, and sometimes has been seen using them to trick others. In the lore of the Unknown, a person that is researching this phenomenon basically hears voices and gets invited, and that's something also that is referred, that I think that is referred in other instances as well. So basically, the Unknown tricks you into thinking that you're safe, to steal your skin. And as you can see with the Unknown, he can wear like a variety of different skins of different genders, and that is because he is using that skin. That's not really his appearance, right? Call of Brine is also really, really simple, much like the Demogorgon earlier. This is a killer that has a supernatural ability to mess with technology, and I don't remember exactly where you can see this, but it is referenced some places that certain videotapes or stuff have been corrupted by the presence of the Unknown. So he does have that ability to mess with technology, and you could see in many of the promotional materials and the trailers and stuff that there's a bit of like an analog horror kind of theme, and he does seem to mess with technology in that way, which I think is interesting. And a really interesting, and Remember Me, I also think is really interesting. As I mentioned earlier, the Unknown is kind of based on other urban legend type creatures and mythical entities that grow in power as you think of them and as you fear them. Just kind of like those characters that you're not supposed to say their name 3 times in front of a mirror. It's that type of entity, right? And in fact, one of the reasons why it's possible that the Unknown targets certain individuals is because those individuals do not fear him. So in the lore of the Unknown, there's a reporter, basically that's like a journalist / reporter that's trying to dig into it. She's not afraid of it. She doesn't believe, she's skeptic. And that's why the Unknown was attempting to take her. In the end, he fails because he gets abducted by the entity, the unknown that is. But he was trying to take her because she didn't fear him, because she was not contributing to his power, right? So Remember Me is appropriate for a character that seems to live in the memory and become more powerful because of the fact that people have mentioned him. It's also explained that the unknown is responsible or might be responsible for disappearances dating hundreds and hundreds of years back. So it is literally a folklore monster that lives mostly thanks to the fear that people put into him, if that makes sense. The Lich. This is a very lore-heavy character, and I'm not gonna lie, I find it really, really difficult to find 4 perks that I am very comfortable with, but some of them are honestly quite easy. The first one is Undying. This character is called the Lich. And one thing that's very striking about his appearance, if you don't know anything about him, is that he's basically a skeleton. This character is much, much older than any person normally would be, and it's because he is a necromancer. He raises the dead, and he himself has turned into an undying monster. Hence, Hex Undying. Third seal, I think, was a bit of a reach, but I do believe that this character has the ability to hinder others and apply magical spells that affect others. In fact, many of his add-ons, like the Whirlpool Sword, allow you to do exactly that. And also in the trailer, I believe the skeletons cover the mouth of Astri. So I don't know, some kind of magical ability to hinder others seems appropriate for him. Overwhelming Presence also seems appropriate. This character in his universe has a terrible and terrifying reputation. In fact, if you read the description, it says, few dare speak his true name, Vecna, for fear that he might hear, or worse. So he does have a terrifying presence to him. At this point, I also consider giving him Zanchin Tactics, because in his lore, he is a general. He's basically a badass that has discovered a lot of magical artifacts and is a glutton for knowledge. And at that point, he finds a page that references the entity, and he willingly steps into the fog to find out more. So basically, he's buying stuff on Amazon and stumbles onto the dark web and wants to buy some of that good stuff that he can't find on retail stores. That's basically what he's done. So he's basically on the entity's realm as a bit of a shopping spree. You might also realize he has a little mark on his back, a little seal on his back. One of the reasons I chose third seal. And it's something related to his powers being suppressed by the entity, but that's something that I'm not super familiar with. But yeah, he's basically not exerting his full power. Now, Hoarder, I thought was interesting. In the lore of this character, he has a lot of magical artifacts, and he is the only character that creates extra, or one of the only characters, I guess, that creates extra chests with a variety of different items. He spawns magical chests with magical items that the survivors can find. And one thing that characterizes a hoarder is that they collect a lot of garbage or a lot of things, and they don't want to throw it away, right? Even if it's garbage, they don't want to throw it. It's their garbage. And this character is kind of mad when the survivors are like finding these items. He's like, no, don't touch that. Brigands. So I think hoarder suits him. I don't know. I thought he was a cute pick. Next up, Dark Lord. Okay, apologies. Honestly, I think the Dark Lord maybe needed Shadowborn. Darkness, yeah. He's a vampire, so my apologies for not giving him Dark Shadowborn. I don't know if it's appropriate. Maybe someone will tell me. But yeah, Dracula was basically a vampire that fell in love with a human. This human was killed by other humans for being a witch, and he became very, very, very mad, to put it mildly. With Attunement is a perk about being attuned to magic and magical powers, and I honestly think that no other killer other than Vecna and Dracula are fitting that description to this degree. So I think being attuned to magic seems appropriate to Dracula. So he gets this perk. Retribution is the most important one. This obviously depends on which version of Dracula you're looking at. I watched the anime, so I'm familiar with that, but this is from the games. But basically, in most of them, what happens is that his wife gets murdered, and he swears revenge, and he literally tells the people, I am going to wipe you all out. You are lesser than me. I've tolerated you. There was a moment where he was tolerant of humanity. That's over. Now he will take retribution, and he literally warns the people of an entire country that he will wipe it out. In the show, it's like in a year. That's why I think Nowhere to Hide is appropriate, because he literally has the intention to raise an army and level the entire country, right? Thrill and Tremors, again, is appropriate, much like Pyramid Head. This was one of the killers that was invited to the fog by the entity. It wasn't taken against its will. It wasn't... it didn't stumble by accident. It was invited by the entity. At least that's my interpretation of the lore. So that's why I like my dark designs and my straight composure got the entity aroused. It seems appropriate. Shadowborn though. And then we have the Houndmaster. The Houndmaster was... the Houndmaster basically was kidnapped by pirates that killed her father and were about to kill her, but she turned the situation around and eventually managed to overthrow them and seek revenge. So the first perk that we give her is Leverage. Keep in mind, this character would have suffered a similar fate as many of her friends and family, right? But she managed to use her skills as leverage to convince her captors to listen to her. Her captors knew that she was good at sailing the seas, and they asked her, okay, take us to this place where we're going to find more riches, where we're going to find more loot. That's why we have human greed, by the way. We'll talk about this in a minute. And she convinced them that she had found a course for the ships to go through, but this was, spoilers, a doom curse, TM, because she actually, on purpose, took all of these ships through the most dangerous path she could and got everyone killed, right? She survived, and well, she barely survived, and then obviously she had multiple pets. I think Snug was one of them. And after she survived, as you can imagine, she wasn't very happy, and she swore revenge on the people that had done this, on a particular person, and she started to conspire. She would use the greed of these pirates to trick them and ultimately capture them and basically kill all of them. And at one point, well, not at one point, probably ever since, she started to see the face of the person that killed her father in everyone she killed. And much like the spirit, similar to the spirit, her desire for revenge on that person made her do unspeakable acts against other people. And the final perk is Ruin, because one thing that's really striking about this character is that she's under no delusion, right? She has awareness. She's not a complete dead inside monster. And she also doesn't have any hope. She understands that her path is leading her to ruin, and she walks it willingly. In fact, at one point, if you listen to her dialogue in game, she will say certain lines such as, there's no hope. Not for them, not for us. This is not going to end well. And yeah, obviously she has brought ruin to herself and to everything around her in her path, in her path of revenge, essentially. And then we have Ghoul that came out like yesterday, and oh my god, I forgot to include him, and it's too late, and now I need to end the video, god damn it. Yeah, unfortunately the Ghoul just came out and I didn't have enough time to use their perks. If we find them, let's type Ghoul. Yeah, we have Forever Entwined, Nothing But Misery. Okay, Forever Entwined, this is probably for the twins. If I had to give it to someone, for the twins, they literally are entwined forever. Nothing But Misery. Ooh, that's a good one. Who would have Nothing But Misery? Honestly, Artis literally was born miserable and had nothing but misery her whole life. I think this would be an Artis one. And none are free. Ooh, who would get none are free? Who's the character that yearns for freedom? That's a tough one. None are free. You could Wraith. You could argue Wraith, because Wraith went from civil war to murderous Scandal, yeah, I don't know, that one's tough. Please let me know what you think these perks would be appropriate to and what perks would go on the Ghoul. I haven't done any research. I watched the anime a little bit, but I really don't know. So yeah, if you guys want to fill in this last killer for me, I would really appreciate that because I haven't been able to do the homework since it came out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was enjoyable. How long was it? An hour? Damn, dude, I'm always 3 times slower than I think I will be. Anyway, it was fun. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.